They abandoned me, left me to starve, and never looked back. But when they needed help, I was long gone. I was 8 years old when my parents threw me out like trash. No warning, no explanation. One moment, I was their child. The next, I was nothing. The front door slammed behind me, and I stood there in my pajamas, barefoot on the cold pavement. "Don't come back," my mother's voice cut through the night. I didn't understand. What had I done? Tears blurred my vision as I turned to face the empty street. It was late. The neighborhood was silent. No one would hear me if I screamed. And I knew, deep down, they weren't going to change their minds. I was alone. I took a shaky breath, wrapping my arms around myself. The wind cut through my thin shirt, chilling me to the bone. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Silence. I pounded my fists against the wood until my hands hurt. Still nothing. They were really gone. I swallowed my sobs and turned away. My stomach twisted with hunger, but I had no food. No money. No idea where to go. So I did the only thing an 8-year-old could do. I walked. The night stretched endlessly around me. Every shadow felt like a monster waiting to grab me. Every sound made my heart race. I kept telling myself I'd find someone. Someone who would help. But hours passed. The streets were empty. The city lights felt like a distant dream. I had never felt so small. So helpless. So unwanted. I don't know how long I wandered before my legs gave out. My body curled up on a cold bench, exhaustion swallowing me whole. I closed my eyes, telling myself I'd just rest for a second. But as the darkness took over, one terrifying thought echoed in my mind. What if I don't wake up? The cold crept into my bones. My body trembled, curled up on that hard wooden bench. I was 8 years old. I should have been asleep in my bed, safe, warm. But instead, I was alone, freezing, and terrified. Every sound made my heart hammer against my ribs. Rustling leaves, distant footsteps, the occasional car passing by. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping sleep would take me. Hoping this was just a nightmare. But nightmares end. This didn't. I don't know how long I lay there before I heard it, footsteps. Not far. Getting closer. I stopped breathing. My tiny fingers gripped the edge of the bench. Was it someone who could help me? Or someone who would make things even worse? I peeked through my lashes. A dark figure moved through the shadows, slow, deliberate. Watching, I shrank into myself, pressing against the cold wood. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't let them see you. The footsteps stopped. I felt my heart beat in my throat. Then a voice. Low. Rough. Too close. What are you doing out here all alone? I didn't answer. He took another step forward. I wanted to run. But my body was frozen in fear. You lost, kid? My lips parted, but no sound came out. I didn't trust him. I couldn't. His shoes scuffed against the pavement as he took another slow step. I forced myself to move. I bolted. My bare feet hit the pavement, every step sending sharp pain up my legs. I didn't care. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. I heard him curse behind me, but I didn't look back. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I pushed forward. The city stretched ahead, endless streets, towering buildings. I had never felt smaller. Never felt more lost. And then, as I turned a corner, my foot caught on something. I fell hard, my hands scraping against the concrete. Pain shot through me, but I had no time to cry. Because when I looked up, he was still following me. Pain burned through my scraped palms, but I didn't have time to think about it. He was still there, standing at the end of the street, watching me. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short gasps. My legs were shaking, but I forced them to move. Run. Just run. The streets blurred around me. My tiny feet slapped against the pavement, every step sending jolts of pain up my legs. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I turned another corner, nearly crashing into an overflowing trash can. My hands gripped the cold metal, steadying myself. I ducked behind it, pressing my back against the wall, sucking in quick, shallow breaths. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe I lost him. Silence. For the first time in what felt like hours, the city was quiet. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, getting closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands clamped over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Don't breathe. Don't move. The steps stopped just a few feet away. I could hear his breathing. Low. Steady. He was looking for me. I curled in on myself, praying, begging for him to just leave. A few seconds passed. Then a few more. And then, he walked away. I didn't move until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. My whole body was trembling. My lungs burned from holding my breath. I needed to get out of here. But where? I had no home. No money. No one to call. I was just an 8-year-old, alone in a city that didn't care if I lived or died. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I wiped it away angrily. Crying wouldn't help me. I forced my legs to move, stepping out of my hiding place. My whole body ached. My bare feet stung from running over rough pavement. I needed warmth. Food. A plan. But first, I needed to survive the night. The air was colder now. Or maybe my body was just too weak to fight it anymore. I walked the empty streets, arms wrapped around myself, trying to stop the shivers. My feet ached with every step, but I couldn't stop moving. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant realizing how alone I really was. The city was quiet, but it wasn't empty. People walked past me, adults, couples, groups of friends. Some laughed, some talked loudly, some stared at their phones. Not one of them looked at me. Not one of them saw me. I wanted to scream, to grab someone's sleeve and beg them to help me. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. Nobody cared. I wasn't their problem. I was just another kid wandering the streets. A stranger. Invisible. I passed a small diner with bright neon signs. The smell of food hit me so hard my stomach twisted. I pressed my hands against the glass, staring at the plates piled high with warm meals. Burgers, fries, steaming bowls of soup. A group of kids sat inside, laughing, their parents smiling beside them. That should have been me. Instead, I was out here. Starving. Freezing. Unwanted. I looked down at myself, bare feet dirty, pajamas torn at the knee from when I fell. My hands were covered in dried blood and grime. I didn't belong in there. I didn't belong anywhere. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Crying wouldn't fix this. I turned away from the diner and kept walking. I had no idea where I was going. But if I stopped now, I wasn't sure if I'd ever start moving again. I kept walking. The city felt endless, stretching in every direction like a maze with no exit. The cold wind bit at my skin, but I barely noticed anymore. My body had gone numb. But the hunger? The hunger was unbearable. It clawed at my stomach, twisting it into painful knots. Every step felt heavier, my legs weaker. My head pounded, dizzy from exhaustion. I tried not to think about food. Tried not to think about the smell of that diner. Tried not to think about how easy it would be to knock on a stranger's door and beg. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew the truth. No one was coming to save me. I passed a grocery store with a bright red sign, the windows filled with fresh produce. Baskets of fruit sat outside, untouched. I stopped. An apple. Just one. That's all I needed. I could grab it and run. My heart pounded at the thought. Stealing. Would that make me like them? Like the people who threw me away without a second thought? I clenched my fists. I didn't want to steal. But I didn't want to starve either. I glanced around, my hands twitching at my sides. The store owner wasn't looking. People walked past me, focused on their own lives. It would be so easy. I took a deep breath and reached out. A hand grabbed my wrist. I gasped, my whole body freezing in place. A man stood beside me, his grip firm but not rough. His eyes narrowed as he looked me over. "Where are your parents?" My throat tightened. I yanked my arm free and ran. Ran as fast as my weak legs could carry me, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. I didn't stop until my body forced me to. I collapsed in an alleyway, my chest heaving, my stomach aching. And for the first time since they threw me out, I started to wonder if I would survive the night. I lay in the alleyway, my cheek pressed against the cold pavement. My breaths were shallow, uneven. My whole body ached, the hunger twisting in my stomach like a knife. I didn't know how long I had been there. Minutes? Hours? Everything felt slow, like the world was moving without me. I tried to sit up, but my arms trembled under my weight. My legs wouldn't move. My body was giving up. A wave of dizziness hit me, and for a moment, the world blurred. My eyelids felt heavy. Just rest for a second. Just a second. But a voice in my head screamed at me, "If you fall asleep here, you won't wake up." Panic jolted through me, but even fear wasn't enough to make my body listen. I needed warmth, food, help, but I had no idea where to find any of those things. The city didn't care about me. The people walking past didn't care. And my parents? They probably hadn't thought about me once. Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced them back. Crying wouldn't fix this. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to move. One shaky breath, then another. I pressed my palms against the ground, pushing up with all the strength I had left. My legs wobbled, my vision swayed, but I stood. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. If I stopped now, I wasn't going to survive the night. I forced one foot in front of the other. Every step felt impossible, my legs trembling beneath me. My body screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Not here. Not in this alley. I wasn't going to die like this. I stumbled back onto the main street, gripping a lamppost to steady myself. The world spun. Cars passed by. People walked past me without a glance. I was invisible. My stomach twisted painfully, hunger gnawing at my insides. My head pounded. My body was shutting down, and I knew it. I needed to find food. Now, across the street, I spotted a gas station. Bright lights. A cashier inside. Shelves lined with snacks. I swallowed hard. I had no money, but I had two choices, steal or collapse. I wasn't proud of it, but I had no choice. I waited for a group of customers to walk in, then followed behind them, trying to blend in. The warmth hit me first. After hours in the cold, it felt like heaven. I shuffled through the aisles, my eyes darting between the food and the cashier. He was busy. Distracted. I grabbed the first thing I saw, a pack of crackers. Small. Easy to hide. My hands shook as I stuffed it under my shirt. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone in the store could hear it. I turned to leave, forcing my legs to move quickly, but before I reached the door, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I froze. A deep voice spoke behind me. Going somewhere? I couldn't breathe. I had been caught. And I had no idea what was going to happen next. My whole body tensed. The grip on my shoulder tightened, firm but not rough. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I had been caught. I turned slowly, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. The cashier stood behind me, eyes narrowed. He was tall, older, maybe in his 50s. His expression was unreadable. I braced myself for yelling, for him to drag me back inside and call the cops. But he didn't. He just stared at me, his gaze flicking down to my torn clothes, my bare feet, my trembling hands. Then, his grip loosened. Are you hungry? The question hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I didn't need to answer. He already knew. He sighed, glancing toward the store. Come inside. Panic shot through me. This was a trick. He was luring me back in so he could punish me. I took a step back, ready to bolt. He raised his hands, palms up, as if to show he wasn't a threat. You don't have to steal, kid. Just come inside. My stomach twisted. I didn't trust him. I couldn't trust him. But my body was too weak to run, and I had nothing left to lose. I hesitated, then took a shaky step forward. The warmth of the store wrapped around me as I stepped inside. The bright lights made my head spin. The cashier walked behind the counter, grabbed something from a shelf, then placed it in front of me. A sandwich. A bottle of water. I stared at it, my throat dry. Eat, he said. I waited for the catch. The condition. The punishment. It never came. Slowly, I reached for the food. My hands shook as I unwrapped the sandwich, the smell making my stomach ache even more. The first bite nearly made me cry. I didn't realize how close I was to breaking until that moment. I ate like I had never eaten before, barely chewing, barely breathing. The cashier didn't say anything. He just watched. And for the first time since my parents threw me away, someone finally saw me. I ate so fast I barely tasted the food. My hands shook as I brought the sandwich to my mouth, each bite disappearing in seconds. The hunger had been so bad for so long that my stomach twisted in pain, struggling to handle real food again. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The cashier didn't say a word. He just leaned against the counter, watching. Not with judgment. Not with pity. Just watching. I drained the bottle of water in one go, the cool liquid soothing my dry throat. When I set it down, I realized my hands were still trembling. Not from hunger this time. From exhaustion. From everything. I expected him to ask questions. Where are your parents? Why are you alone? But he didn't. He just sighed, rubbed a hand down his face, and shook his head. You got somewhere to go? The question hit harder than I expected, because I already knew the answer. I had nowhere. I lowered my eyes, staring at my empty hands. I felt like if I said it out loud, it would make it too real. The cashier exhaled, then walked to the back of the store. A minute later, he came back and placed something on the counter. A small plastic bag. Take it, he said. I hesitated, then peeked inside. Another sandwich. Another bottle of water. A small bag of chips. I gripped the bag tight, my fingers curling around the handles. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever just helped me before. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked up at him, searching for some kind of catch. Some kind of trick. But there wasn't one. For the first time since I had been thrown out, someone looked at me and didn't see a problem to get rid of. They saw a kid. A kid who had been abandoned. A kid who just needed someone to care. I gripped the bag tighter and nodded, my voice barely a whisper. Thank you. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I stepped out of the gas station, gripping the plastic bag so tightly my fingers ached. The food inside wasn't much, a sandwich, a bottle of water, a small bag of chips. But to me, it meant everything. I didn't know why the cashier had helped me. I didn't understand why he cared when no one else had. But for the first time in days, I had food, I had warmth, and I had hope. The city still stretched around me, endless and unforgiving. I was still alone. But something felt different. I had survived another night. And I wasn't giving up now. I walked for hours, the bag swinging at my side. I wasn't sure where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. Then, out of nowhere, my body stopped. I looked up and realized where my feet had taken me. A house. Not my parents' house. My aunt's. I hadn't seen her in years. She and my mom had a falling out when I was younger, and they stopped talking. But I remembered her. She was kind. She always smelled like vanilla and old books. When I was little, she used to slip me candy behind my mom's back. She was the only person in my family who ever made me feel safe. I stared at the front door, my heart pounding. Would she even recognize me? Would she care? I wanted to turn around. To run. But my legs moved on their own. One step. Then another. And before I knew it, I was knocking on the door. My breath caught in my throat. What if she turned me away? What if she was like them? The door opened. And there she was. Her eyes widened the second she saw me. She took in my dirty clothes, my bare feet, my trembling hands gripping the plastic bag. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She just pulled me into her arms and whispered, "You're safe now." And for the first time since that horrible night, I believed it. I never saw my parents again. My aunt took me in, no questions asked. She gave me food, a bed, a home. She gave me a chance. It took me years to heal, to stop waking up in a panic, thinking I was still on the streets. But I did. I built a life. And the family that threw me away, they became nothing more than a distant memory. Because in the end, I survived. And they lost me forever.